Want to give a quick shout out to all of my patrons. Thank you so much for all of the continued support. Hey everybody, so it is time for my yearly top 10 most anticipated fantasy book releases of the year. Now keep in mind, these are like my top 10. They're not like the most popular top 10, but these are the ones that I am like day one, if not before. If I can get them before. But these are the ones that I am most looking forward to reading, starting with number 10, and it is The Glass Immortals. This is book number 2 of the Glass Immortals series by Brian McClellan. I don't know what the actual title of the book's going to be, but I know that's the series. And this is tentatively set for later in 2024. Now, Brian McClellan is more popularly known for writing the *𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻 series. It's a 6-book series, although it's like split into 2 trilogies, and the second trilogy is not named. It's like Gods of Powder and something or something. I don't know. It's not as good as the first one, but I really ended up liking. I like the first trilogy quite a bit. So I was very excited to read this first one last year, and I really liked it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, which I feel like was one of the more generous reviews out there among booktubers, of those that even read it. A lot of people were kind of down on it, and I think ultimately, and I can't speak for them, but I think a lot of people were looking forward to reading another *𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻 story, and it wasn't that. It was a very different story, but one that really entranced me. I thought it was a very well done story. I feel like the characters in this book were extremely memorable. I feel like the plot took a lot of the good plot points and went forward with it. I felt like it was one of those books that felt like so much happens in a short amount of pages, and I'm really looking forward to see what he has next. I feel like this one's going to be a big hinge book for me, where if it's as good or better than the first one, then I'm going to be super psyched to read the final one. But if the next book is worse than the first one, it might kind of dry me out on the series, considering I gave the first one 4 out of 5 instead of 5 out of 5. Number 9 is The Daughter's War. This is a prologue book to The Black Tongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman. This is supposed to come out on June 25th. The Black Tongue Thief, I feel like, was a darling of the booktube community, and I think fantasy in general. Not the most popular in the world, but it got a lot of people talking about it. And I feel like it kind of hit people out of the blue. I don't know what Christopher Buehlman's wrote before, but I certainly know that it's not very popular. But The Black Tongue Thief is ingeniously written. I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5, mostly because I feel like the first half of it was such an easy 5 out of 5, but the second half I feel like really floundered, and I gave it, if I was giving it scores to half books, I'd give it like a 3 out of 5, so it averaged out. But the writing quality was there. It was this very witty writing that wasn't like laugh out loud, but it constantly had me smiling. I love this main character, and I don't know where this next book's going to go. It's a prologue story, but I don't know anything else about it. I'd like to keep myself a little bit in the dark. But if he can capture that writing style that I know that he's capable of, and can keep up the pace, not so much the pace, but the quality of the story, beginning, middle, and end, he's going to come out with a banger. And I'll be one of many people that are picking this one up when it comes out in June. Number 8 is No Life Forsaken. This is book number 2 of the Witness series by Steven Erikson. This is going to come out in the fall of this year, no specific date yet. Steven Erikson, very popular for writing Malazan Book of the Fallen, but he's continued to write lots of different books in this greater Malazan world. He's written some short stories in the 𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻 and 𝐶𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻, and he's written a very big prequel, a very long ago prequel story, hundreds of thousands of years prequel to the original series, called the 𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻 trilogy. He's written 2 of them, but then he picked up this one, and I think the first Witness book came out last year, and it was very well done. It's a continuation of Malazan Book of the Fallen, so it takes place after that. It's a much more specific book. It's dealing with a very small amount of land, a much tighter story. It might be the most well-plotted Malazan story, mostly because Malazan stories can be very out there and, trying to keep track of everything. This is a lot more streamlined, and I liked it for what it was. I think I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. Really liked it. It wasn't quite to the expectations I think that I had put out there myself. I feel like if I read it again, I might give it a higher score. But no matter what, I'm definitely going to be picking up that next one when it comes out in the fall. Number 7 is Empire of the Damned. This is book number 2 of Empire of the Vampire by Jake Kristoff. This comes out February 29th. I will try to get my review out around the 29th. I already own it, actually. The publisher very kindly sent me a copy, which is great. I love the first book in this, Empire of the Vampire. And I heard a lot of people talking about it, but I think it got picked for me in one of my Patreon raffle picks, because I would never read this if we're on my own. I have a kind of bias against some of these kind of medieval style mythical creatures like vampires and werewolves. I feel like they're tired is a fantasy creature, but this was awesome. This put the fearsomeness back in vampires that I feel like has got lost recently, where vampires just feel like run of the mill, nothing special, and these felt terrifying. And I feel like the plot was so well done. I really do like the writing of Jake Kristoff, although I don't like his earlier works. I think he wrote, was it Nevernight that he wrote? And I hated it. And I'm so surprised that I hated it, because I think he's a good writer. But he definitely matured a lot as a writer since he wrote that piece of garbage. Sorry to be so harsh on it, but I absolutely loathed that book. But yeah, Empire of the Vampire, great story, great framing narrative, keeps me on my toes. No idea where the story is going to go, and makes me have a much bigger appreciation for vampires as a mythical creature. Number 6 is The Sharded Few. This is book number 2 of the Sharded Few series by Alex Hudson. No idea what the title of this one's going to be. But I saw an interview that he did recently where he said that he's going to, has tentatively set for the second half of 2024. Now, this is probably the book that the least amount of people here are going to know anything about. The Sharded Few got on my radar from a Reddit thread in r/fantasy, where somebody mentioned how this is a very good epic fantasy, progression fantasy blend. I happen to like both those things, so the blend interested me. So I wrote to the author and asked if he could send me a review copy. He very kindly did, and I fell in love with it. I gave it an easy 5 out of 5 stars. It is, it's everything that I kind of wanted out of a fantasy story, out of my progression fantasy stories. A lot of these progression fantasies are a little sillier. They're more video gamey. And by progression, I mean like the characters level up, they get stronger and stronger, very clear linear arc to their power progression. And this one it felt like a blend of like Sanderson with those video gamey type things. I know Sanderson already has those video gamey type things. Sanderson kind of does progression style already, although technically I guess it's not. I'm not like the best definer on what that means, but people tell me like, no, it's not actually progression. It feels like it. But the magic system here is ingenious. The magic powers people have feel in one way so familiar, but in another way so unique. And that's hard to do when there's thousands upon thousands upon thousands of fantasy stories that have already been written. But Alex Hudson really does set himself apart, and I can't wait to read the next one. Number 5 is Warlords of Weirdwood. This is book number 2 of the Forsaken trilogy by R.J. Barker. This is set to come out on September 10th. I feel pretty confident it's going to come out then because R.J. Barker is a writing fiend. If you follow him on Twitter, which I do, he's constantly making these posts about how much he wrote for the day, and it's these enormously big numbers in terms of like word count of what he's pumping out. He's a great writer. I am just love the Tidechild trilogy that he wrote to bits. It's just one of my favorite trilogies that I've ever read. And to read this first one that came out, Gods of the Weirdwood, I didn't know what to expect because I knew it had this kind of lost in the woodsy kind of theme to it, a little darker, a little spookier, multi-POV story, and it worked so well. It's such a unique book. And I'm really impressed by how much R.J. Barker has, taken what he wrote in the Tidechild trilogy and then decided to say, like, look, I have these skills. I'm going to write something totally different and try to make it work. Now, he writes that style of fantasy where I oftentimes hate this style, where the author doesn't really know and plot out everything as they go along. They're like, okay, this is kind of where I want it to go. I'm just going to write. I'm going to let the pages write themselves and let these character interactions happen the way that my fingers just decide that they take them. The Stephen King model, if you will. And I find that doesn't work a lot in fantasy. And it can oftentimes come to a very poor ending to a story. Now, we'll see if this is a poor ending to this. I felt like the 𝗏𝐻𝐼𝐿 trilogy, the ending was the worst part of it, but the series was so good that I had to forgive it. But hopefully that can get rectified here. But I have every confidence in the world that the second book in this trilogy is going to be a banger. Number 4 is The Trials of Empires. This is book number 3 of The Empire of the Wolf by Richard Swan. I think this is the final in a trilogy. Maybe it's more than a trilogy, but I think this is it. It comes out February 6th, so it's the earliest one in this list that's coming out. And I am so upset that I have not been able to get my hands on this thing. I've tried desperately to get my hands on it, and I failed miserably. But whatever, I'll pick it up on February 6th like everybody else. I just won't be able to have my review out on February 6th. But man, I love Empire of the Wolf so much. I truly, truly thought that I was going to have problems with this, knowing that it's kind of a mystery story. It's a very isolated story dealing with like one little town. It's got this kind of courtroom kind of drama in it. These are things that don't normally kind of look like they would appeal to me. But somehow it just works so well. And, it's got these, antagonists that are truly terrifying. I mean, it's got some horror elements in it that I hate in my stories, but it's all these things that I normally hate that just come together and make the perfect little concoction. The second book really opens things up. It turns into more of like an epic style fantasy story with these kind of mystery aspects to it. And man, oh man, I can't stop thinking about it. And I cannot wait to see what Richard Swan has in store for this third book in this wonderful series thus far. Book number 3 is Disquiet Gods. This is book number 6 of The Sun Eater by Christopher Ruocchio. This should come out on April 2nd. I am such a big Sun Eater fan, and I'm so happy that it feels like a lot of other people are starting to pick up on it. Like Daniel Green is bumping out reviews, which is, he's got to be like the biggest fantasy booktuber out there, right? And, Petrick's reviewing it. They're giving rave reviews, and they're totally right. Christopher Ruocchio, I feel like, is so undervalued in terms of the popularity that I think he deserves. He is truly a masterful writer. I mean, his grasp of the English language and the way that he can write things just so poetically and beautifully, but not feel this purple prose that goes over the top. And simultaneously weaving this absolutely masterful story that's this amazing blend of science fiction and fantasy in one, that takes things in ways that you would never in a million years imagine, that makes you cry, makes you cheer, gives you all this range of human emotion that make this stand out is such a special work that I'm just dying to know what happens next. Number 2 on this list is Of Empires in Dust. This is book number 4 of The Bound and the Broken by Ryan Cahill. This should come out the second half of 2024. I have been slowly converted over into a mega fan of what Ryan Cahill is putting together. I think he should be recognized as a titan of the fantasy genre. He's putting together these works that feel like the next big thing. They feel like the next big Wheel of Time type story, the next Stormlight Archive kind of story. And I feel like it's just a matter of time before the masses latches onto this, because there's nothing to dislike here other than the first book is noticeably worse than the second and third books. The second and third books are some of the best books that I've ever read, not in the year I read them, but overall, in the hundreds and hundreds of fantasy books that I've read, they're among the top. And it's doing things so perfectly for what you'd want out of a huge, sprawling, epic fantasy that it's just captured my imagination. And I cannot stop thinking about them. And I need more people to get on board the hype train for The Bound and the Broken. And number 1, which I feel like is probably the number 1 for most lists like this, is going to be Wind in Truth. This is book number 5 of Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. This should come out December 6th, and it is not even close. A lot of these on this list, I kind of debated. I moved them around. I was like, okay, we'll move this. Wind in Truth got to number 1, and it's such a huge drop-off between number 1 and number 2, even though I love Ryan Cahill's writing just as much as I love Brandon Sanderson's writing. But I'm so excited about this one. You know, Brandon Sanderson got me back into fantasy with the Stormlight Archive series. And I have a special place in my heart for it. And, you know, I've given the highest scores that I could to these books. But I'm so confident that the 5th book is going to be the best of the bunch. And I know that's a bold statement because he's written some books that are just considered some of the best fantasy books of all time. But he can end stories because he plots them so carefully. You know, he knows everything that's going to happen. And while this is a 10-book series, this is really split up into 2 5-book arcs. So this is the last of a big arc. It is going to rock. I'm so confident. You know, everything in my body tells me that it's going to be the perfect book. And I have no idea what's going to happen, but I know I'm just going to be amazed with the rest of you. And I cannot wait to read this with the thousands and thousands and thousands of other people on December 6th when we all finally get our hands on this and are trying to devour this thing in as short amount of time as physically possible. So those are my 10. What are your 10? I'd love to know. If you don't have 10, if you just have 1 or 2, like what did I miss on this list that's interesting to you? And what's on this list that's the same as you? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to chat with you about it. And as always, happy reading to you. Thanks again to all my patrons, with a special shout out to my Ascendant tier and Librarian tier patrons: Anna G, CJ, Doust, Darren, Gregory, Jonathan, Nathan T, Nev's Book Channel, 𝗟𝗏𝗄𝐿, Ron Reich, Russell, Ryan L, Sydney Baker, Tay C, Tahir, Anna, Andra, Blair, Brock, Evan, Fanixan, Harry B, Joe, Cat Mick, Michael Sugarman, Philippe, Sky, TW57, 𝗏𝐿𝐴𝐾𝐬, and Zion. Thanks for sticking to the end of this video, and if you want to watch some more content from my channel, click over here and I've got some good videos for you. Thanks so much.